Hi guys, and welcome back to another true crime and makeup time video. If you're new here, my name is Zara and I post a new true crime video every single week. So if you love makeup and you love true crime, definitely hit that notification bell button so you don't miss any more videos. Hit the like button if you like this video and make sure to subscribe. So I'm not hugely aware of a lot of serial killers. I've just never really been interested in trying to learn about a lot of them because it kind of freaks me out, but I've been getting a lot of requests to do more serial killer cases and just to talk about it. So I stumbled across today's case and I could not stop reading about this guy. Like, he really creeps me out. I wanted to thank today's sponsor, Murder by Choice. Murder by Choice is a murder mystery game set on a tropical island in today's times. Your character is a young journalist named Carla Page who gets an invite from a billionaire to join his yearly private party on a tropical island. When you arrive, you get caught in one of the worst storms of the year, but apart from being stuck on this island, a murder takes place. Carla then tries to solve this mystery, but along the way, each discovery uncovers more questions. It's a fully interactive adventure where your choices dictate how the story unfolds. That means each player has a unique experience. Finding hidden objects isn't the only aim of this game. It has so much content like comics, 30 mini games, over 50 different locations, so many different types of characters, and investigating this murder where you get to look for clues and question characters who provide valuable information. I have been obsessed with this game. The hidden object games are so fun because you can actually open up certain objects like a suitcase and look inside to find the clues that you need. I can spend so much time on social media and looking up articles and just honestly get mentally overstimulated. So playing this game, it just relaxes me. It doesn't give me anxiety because it's not rushing me on a clock to finish. And the illustrations are so beautiful and the storyline is very intriguing. My favorite character is probably Portia Frost, and she's quite sassy and it just kind of makes me laugh, but they've also invested in proper voice acting, so it makes chatting with the characters that much more immersive. I've been absolutely loving this game. You can really take your time examining each clue and uncovering a plot twist to this thrilling story. It really is a game that will keep you engaged and wanting to find that one extra clue to try and uncover the mystery behind the murder. Murder by Choice is free and available on Android and iOS mobile devices, and you can download the game by clicking on the link in my description box below, or use the QR code to download Murder by Choice straight to your phone. Thank you so much to Murder by Choice for sponsoring today's video, and thank you so much to you, my beautiful friends, for all your continued love and support. Let's get back into today's video. So if we know anything about serial killers, we know that a lot of them have disturbed childhoods. They have family issues usually, and today's case is no different. Ed Kemper is truly frightening to me. Not only does he stand at 6'9", but there's something about his eyes, the blankness, that just freaks me out. And the relationship with his mom. And he was also super intelligent, which makes the crimes that he committed even more depraved. So let's get into today's case. I am stopping myself from yawning so many times. I feel like I look extra tired today, and I am. I didn't get any sleep last night, as you moms will know. But let's try and fix this face up. Speaking of moms, we should probably talk about Ed's mom because she plays a pretty pivotal role in this case. Her name was Clarnell Sage, born on 17th March 1921. She was from Burbank, California, but then moved to Montana after she split with Ed's father. Ed's father was Edmund Kemper Jr., and he actually also had two other siblings, an older sister named Susan and a younger sister named Alan Lee. His parents separated in 1957 and then divorced in 1961 on the terms that they used to be mental cruelty. Also, remember how I said he was really tall? Well, his dad was 6'9" also, and then his mom was 6 foot. So that's where he gets his height from. His father was a former World War II soldier, and then he ended up taking a job testing nuclear bombs. But he is quoted as saying that despite the career choice that he had taken, living with his wife was far worse. He stated it was his hardest mission because he had to put up with her mental cruelty and her cruel comments about how his job as an electrician was just so menial. I want to read you a quote from his father, and he said, "Suicide missions in wartime and the atomic bomb testings were nothing compared to living with Clarnell. She affected me more than 396 days and nights than fighting on the front did." So he didn't like Clarnell. So based off his dad's description of what his mother was like, we know that Ed Ed, had a pretty tumultuous childhood. His mother was an alcoholic who possibly suffered from borderline personality disorder. She was not a very affectionate mother. She actually refused to show any affection towards Ed because she believed that it could, if she gave him too much affection, it could possibly turn him gay. And he lived in a very turbulent environment, and it's believed that this environment is what caused him to begin to have these dark fantasies. And he obviously had some dark fantasies because at a very early age, he began to start decapitating his sister's dolls. He goes on to say that he specifically remembers that when he would do these things, that he definitely felt a sexual thrill because when he pulled the heads off, that popping sound, like when you have dolls when you're a kid and it's like a ball and the head is on the ball, and to remove it, you have to like elasticate the head and it pops it off. It's like a very distinct noise. That noise is that noise and holding up the doll's head by the hair is what like turned him on. He said whipping their heads off and their body sitting there headless, that got him off. Now, that wasn't the only game because look, who hasn't played with someone who starts ripping dolls' heads off? I mean, for sure, my cousins did that, like for sure to my dolls. But what was more disturbing, and this is like, it wouldn't be, I don't think it would be so disturbing if he didn't do all these other things, but one of the games he would play with his sisters is a gas chamber or the electric chair, where he was the victim, I guess, sitting in the gas chamber and suffocating and dying, and that's what was happening to him, and his sisters would have to like play that, like strap him to the electric chair and okay, the gas chamber is switching on now, oh my god, there's no oxygen in the room. Like that's what he would want to play. When he turned 10, this disturbing behavior, as it normally does, escalated to real violence because when his father officially left the family home in 1957, he began being violent towards the family cats. He was only 10 and he killed both the family cats, and he buried one alive and then later decapitated it. And like a doll is different, but then to do it to a real live creature is wow. Now, Ed's mom, Clarnell, she was aware of Ed's need to torture and kill animals and assault his sisters and just have really violent behavior. And she ended up starting to become afraid that eventually he was going to escalate to the point where he would end up raping his sisters. And because of this fear, she began parenting him in a way that possibly ruined him even more. So what she did was she began keeping him super ignorant and ingrained in him that his body and any behaviors that he exhibited that was emotional or his feelings or natural feelings, maybe sexual feelings, were dirty and were something to be ashamed of. Any sort of affection was discouraged, and she didn't show him any affection, and she also never taught him any sexual education. She often berated him and insulted him and told him that no woman was ever going to want to be with him. And now this fear that she had of him assaulting his sisters, she thought, okay, I have a great idea. I know how to stop this. I'm going to lock him in the basement. So she forced Ed to sleep in the basement. And I don't know if there are basements in the US that are via a trapdoor. I always thought it was like a door and then stairs going down. But from what I read, it sounded like this basement was beneath like a door in the floor. And then she would place a heavy table over this door to stop him from being able to get out by himself. She basically didn't want him to escape this basement, and he claims that this basement was rat infested. One time when his dad Edmund came to visit the home, he found out about Ed having to sleep in this locked basement and he was furious about it. But by the time he found out, Ed was already like in this sleeping arrangement for 8 months. 8 months. Edmund said that Ed was terrified of this place and there was only one way out. Someone from the outside would have to remove this heavy kitchen table and then like lift the trap door, and that was his only way out. And Edmund said that he threatened Clarinel and he told her that if she didn't stop this behavior, he was going to report her to the police. When Ed was 14, he was already standing tall at 6'4", and he was like, okay, I'm done. And he chose to run away and go track down his father in California, and he wanted to live with him. But when he finally tracked him down, he was horrified to learn that his father had remarried and already had a stepson that was already the same age as him. And soon it became clear that, to Ed at least, that Edmund didn't want him around. Edmund told him that his presence around his new family was making them all uncomfortable, and told him that he needs to go back to his mother in Montana. But when that was like about to happen, his mom as well was like, no, I don't want you. So then he had to go and live with his paternal grandparents. Now, he also hated his grandmother because he stated that she just reminded him of his own mother. He said they were both just aggressive matriarchal women and that they had just been raised that way. Now, apparently his grandfather was also called Edmund, so it's like 3 Edmunds, but he stated that his grandfather was senile and that his grandmother would just emasculate him. He stated that his grandmother thought that she had more balls than any man, and she would constantly emasculate Ed and his grandfather to prove it, you know, like, I'm the leader of the house. Now, his grandmother's name was Maud Kemper. Is that the same name from The Simpsons? Is that Ned's wife? Off topic. But that was his grandmother's name, and she would end up becoming his first victim. Now, him and his grandmother clashed a lot, and that was due to her wanting to control the household, control and run everything. And Ed was just becoming angrier and angrier by the day because he just felt like he was a ticking time bomb, that she was just going to set him off. And one day, he says she did. In August of 1964, when Ed was 16, he had another explosive fight with his grandmother. And this time the fight was about him wanting to go shoot some birds, and they were arguing about that. And as they were arguing about him wanting to go shoot birds, he was holding a rifle in his hand and he shoots his grandmother in the head out of anger and at least 2 times in the back. And the gun that he used was a rifle that was gifted to him by his grandfather. After he does this, he calmly takes her body, goes and hides it, and he waits for his grandfather to come back from the store. So his grandfather wasn't at home because he went to the grocery store, and he actually asked Ed to come with him, but he declined because he wanted to go shoot birds. And he hides his grandmother's body and waits for his grandfather to come home. And even though he was calm about the whole situation, he was afraid of his grandfather coming home and seeing what he had done. And as soon as his grandfather came home, he shoots his grandfather too. He stated that he did this to protect his grandfather. He didn't want his grandfather to feel the pain of seeing his wife dead, shot dead. But then he also says that he shot his grandmother because he also wanted to see what it felt like to kill grandma. I mean, wow. And now this next part is what makes me It's interesting because what he does while their bodies are still warm is he picks up the phone, he calls his mom and he tells her what he did to his grandparents, and then he calls the police and he turns himself in. After that, he just goes on the porch and patiently waited for the police to arrive to take him to the police station. And what do you guys think? Do you feel like that's not common? You know what I mean? So do you feel like if he had gotten some help right then and there, would he have not gone on to commit all the future crimes? It just seems like normally they don't turn themselves in because they want to keep killing. So I wonder what the reasoning for that was. So after the police came, he was then sent to the criminally insane unit of the hospital. And when the doctors examined him, they stated that there was no signs of mental illness, but he was exhibiting signs of paranoid schizophrenia, which isn't that a mental disorder? I would think that paranoid schizophrenia would fall under that, but correct me if I'm wrong. And then it was also discovered that he had an incredibly high IQ of 145, like smart. But despite the crimes that he had committed, I mean, these are real crimes. You shot both your grandparents. It's a double murder. He would only stay in the hospital in this unit for only a few years. So he was there for 5 years. And during those 5 years in that unit, Ed ended up befriending the psychiatrists there. He would act like their assistants to help them diagnose the sociopaths that they were treating. But with helping them, because of his high IQ, he was using that time to learn about the tests and learn how to manipulate the doctors. He would help the doctors with many different types of patients, and some of them were rapists. And he stated that he really learned from the rapists because he learned that after raping a woman, it's best to kill them to eliminate any witnesses. In 1969, on his 21st birthday, is when Ed was released, and he goes to live with his mother following his release. At this time, his mother was working as an administrative assistant at the University of California. And what I really don't agree with is upon his release, because, he had a record now for killing his grandparents, that record was wiped because it had taken place when he was a juvenile. So he's an adult now. It no longer applies. The law in that sense is so strange to me. By this time, he was a full-grown adult. He hit the height of 6'9". He weighed 21 stone, which is like 130 kilos or like 294 pounds. It's huge. And because of this heavy stature of him, it would make him impossible to fight off if you were a victim of his. Now, as he's free again, it didn't take him long to succumb to his murderous urges. But at first, he did try to just live a normal life. He attended college as per his release requirements, and he dreamed of becoming a state trooper, a police officer. Okay. Thankfully, he was denied the job as a state trooper, and he was pretty upset about that. But he wasn't denied for the reasons you think he would be denied for. He was denied because he was too tall, too big to be a state trooper. What? It's not because he killed his grandparents. No, it's because he was too tall. He was too heavy. So following that, he ends up taking a job at the Department of Transportation. But I guess that was wiped from his records, right? So my bad. Go ahead, take this new job. No one knows about what you did. So as he drove around California, he noticed a lot of women hitchhiking, and he began to pick up these women. So at first, he stated that he picked up these women, just to meet people his own age, to strike up a friendship, nothing more. And during this period, he picked up close to 150 girls without any incident. But because he was who he was, he couldn't suppress the urge he had to kill. As he was picking up these women, he started to have sexual fantasies about what he wanted to do to them. So he decided, I'm going to do what I want to do and I'm going to rape these women. However, he was afraid about getting convicted for rape. So he decided, let me use, the knowledge that I've picked up and I'm going to rape these women, but I'm going to kill them to avoid being prosecuted and found altogether. One thing about Ed is that the statements and interviews that he had given, his quotes are wild. Okay. When he was questioned about how he felt when he would see these women on the side of the road, his first thought would be, wow, what an attractive chick. I'd like to talk to her. But then the other side of him would immediately think, wow, I wonder what her head would look like on a stick, her head. So he clearly was into decapitation. Now, again, because of his job, he would take on all these menial jobs that would take him to like different areas of the highway. So he began learning and sort of, memorizing secluded spots and things like that where he could commit these crimes. He made notes of secluded areas of woodlands and highways which to him were ideal for murder and he made note of these. He continued to frequent bars that a lot of police officers went to, and he would listen in to the goss and the information. And the police officers knew that he wanted to be a state trooper, so they just thought he was keen, But during this whole time, remember, he was still living with his mom. And back home with her, he continued to have these crazy, wild fights with her that all the neighbors could hear. These fights would be so frequent and they would drive him crazy. And he states that if it had been a man that he was having these arguments with, they would have been having full-blown fistfights. The fights with his mother were known to be very horrible, very vicious, and he stated that he had never had this type of fight with anyone else as violent, as vicious as he did with his own mother. They were mainly verbal fights, but sometimes verbal fights can destroy you more than a physical fight. And the things that maybe they said to each other were so soul crushing. And to have your own mother say that to you, and you can't really, what can you really do to her, right? Normally. So you sort of for him, maybe he felt helpless in terms of I can't even win this fight with her. He stated that he couldn't even stand the thought that him and his own mother were having these types of fights, and she would just start a fight with him for anything. He said the fights would be over silly things, and one really big fight was over having his teeth cleaned. That's what they had a massive fight about. And after this, he's like, you know what? I need to move out. So he decides to move out. He had a job. So when he moved out, it didn't kind of end because she would constantly show up at his house unannounced or call him constantly and just constantly berate him. But even though he had a job, he often had to go back and live with his mother because he got into some problems. He would sometimes be short on cash and he couldn't make rent. And I don't know if that's because he would spend the money maybe at bars or buying certain things, but he also got into a motorcycle accident, which deemed him unable to just rent. So he had to go back home and live with his mother. But now that he's back living with her, their relationship was getting worse and worse and worse by the day. And he was always one fight away from going out to his car where he had kept a bunch of weapons and things like handcuffs, plastic bags, knives, things that you would need for a murder. And he said he was so close to constantly going to his car and just hurting his mom. And he kept these, tools, the handcuffs, blankets, knives, etc., in his car as sort of a just in case, just in case I need to murder someone, I've got the things I need. Oh my gosh, can you imagine if you're murdering someone and you don't have a knife? What a shame, right? What a freaking weirdo. By 1972, he was back into real violence and decided to act out on his desires. On May 7th, he picked up two Fresno State students who were both 18 years old, Mary Ann Pesci and Anita Luchessa, near Berkeley, California. Now, he picked up these 2 women and he brought them to this secluded, wooded area to rape them. But when he was about to, he panicked and he ended up choking them and stabbing them to death. He then took their bodies in the trunk of his car and he takes them to his house. Now, the crazy thing is, and guys, this happens often with these killers, is that on his way, when he had the bodies in his car, a cop stops him for a broken taillight. They stop him and they questioned him and things like that, but they didn't check his car. They didn't search the vehicle. And if they did, it's not, I don't think it's the cop's fault, but if they did, they would have found the bodies of his second victims inside. Once he gets home, he takes the bodies inside and he rapes them. Then he takes pictures of the bodies and then dismembers them and places them in plastic bags and disposes of them. But right before he does that, he clearly has an obsession with decapitation. Right before he does that, he sexually assaults their decapitated heads. Then he takes their remains and hides them in a ravine near Loma Prieta Mountain. Now, from this crime, Ed would just continue his murdering spree. He would kill again on September 14th, 1972. And like with his previous victims, he picked up a hitchhiker. This time, it was only a 15-year-old girl named Aiko Ku, and she had missed her bus on the way to a class. And dang, guys, back then, hitchhiking, it's so common, isn't it? I mean, is it still common now in the US? I don't know. I feel like in Australia, dang, I've never seen anyone hitchhike, maybe, but super rare. And if I had seen someone hitchhiking, I think it was like a couple whose car had broken down or something. It was never just like people alone trying to travel somewhere by hitchhiking. But over here, like, I think in America too, but over here, if you're driving in the country and you're like driving places, it's just like areas and fields of nothing for ages. And I'm just thinking, like, how do you even end up in this spot? How did you get here to not be able to get out of here, that you need to hitchhike? You know what I mean? Unless your car broke down or something bad happened. But this girl, Aiko, she had just missed her bus to dance class. And it's like, oh, if she just waited for the next bus, life can just do this to you. And it's just so scary to me, But anyway, so he picks up Aiko, and during this encounter, he accidentally locks Aiko in the car. So he's locked himself outside, and you would think that would have ended things, but he somehow managed to convince her to let him back into the vehicle. I mean, if she took the car and drove off and ran him over or something like that, that would be the end to this story. But he convinces her to let him back in, and as soon as he's back in, he chokes her and rapes her. She was unconscious, and then after this, he kills her. And I don't know if I missed it, but I think he killed her by like choking her to death. I think. So after he does this, he takes her body and he places it in his trunk, and he goes to his trunk, looks at her body in there, and he says it felt like it was a fisherman who had caught a big fish and he's looking at his big prize. When I'm imagining that scene, it's just like us as humans, normal people, imagine you looking into a trunk and seeing what he saw and what you would be thinking and what he actually was thinking. The difference between two different people. Do you know what I'm trying to say? I hope that makes sense. So after this, he goes to a bar and has a drink, and then he takes her home, her once again, and dismembers her body. Now, after this, Ed soon begins taking more and more risks, almost like wanting to get caught. That bar that he always hung out at, with the cops were at, was called the Jewelry Room, and he began hanging out there more and more because he enjoyed the thrill of being so close to the people who were trying to catch him. And he officially moved back with his mother in 1973, and even after this, he continued to kill people. He murdered 3 more people while living with his mother. The 3 women that he murdered were all college students that lived in the nearby campus. It was January 7th, 1973, when he shot Cindy Shaw and then stored her body in his closet. Then the next day, after his mom went to work, he takes her body out from his wardrobe and he rapes her before dismembering her body once again. But while he was dismembering her body, he does so with his mom's power saw in his mom's bathtub. Okay. And then he takes her head and he goes outside into the backyard outside his mom's bedroom window and buries Cindy's head facing his mom's window. Facing it. And the reason he did that is so sick because he stated the reason he did this is because his mom always said that she always wanted people to look up to her. Like, it's so morbid and so twisted. Can you imagine buying a house, digging up the house and finding that? Like, what a sicko. Another thing I always think about, and I've been thinking about this since I read about Jeffrey Dahmer's case, is these serial killers, they live with people. How do they clean up these scenes? Like, how do they clean up these crime scenes? How is there not like a drop of blood or a smear of blood or a smell left behind that the people living with them don't notice it? Like, if there was something in my bathtub, first of all, grout. You cannot get blood out of grout, I'm sure. You can't freaking get anything out of grout. So how do they do this? I feel like the people living with them have to know something. A month later, on February 5th, another 2 people were killed. And I'm guessing this is because of this huge argument he has with his mom. So he has to take it out on someone. Rosalind Thorpe and Allison Liu were shot after Ed picks them up while they were hitchhiking. I mean, it was just a bad time to be hitchhiking at the time because Ed Kemper was targeting these people. And again, listen to this. This time he beheads them in his car. How do you do that without getting blood everywhere? Okay. He beheads them in his car and then he takes the bodies home to rape them and then dismember them. How do you do that? He stores these bodies overnight. Like, his mom doesn't know. Did no one see him in the car, like, beheading people? Like, I'm so confused. I mean, look, maybe he's doing this in a secluded area, but can you imagine if someone caught him doing this? Like, what they would be thinking? He stated that the reason why he enjoyed dealing with the head of his victims so much is because the head felt like the final trophy. And this is quite disturbing, so skip if you want to. But he states that the head is where everything is at. The eyes, the nose, the mouth. He stated that that's what makes the person. And he remembers that as a child, if you cut the head off something, the body dies. He said the body is nothing after the head is cut off. But then he goes to say, oh, well, that's not quite true. There's a lot left in a girl's body without the head, insinuating that he could do what he did because there was enough left in the body. And it's so sick. It really is so sick. He's so disturbing. Now, as you guys can probably get the vibe, he seemed to want to hurt someone, usually after getting into it with his mom. And that's not like, you know, clarified essentially, but if you look at the pattern, it seems that way. And, you know, these poor victims ended up being hurt. But in reality, his target was probably his mom. He made a statement saying, "My victims represented not what my mother was, but what she liked, what she coveted, what was important to her. And I was destroying it." And I think living with his mom, I mean, maybe he had no choice, but living with his mom just brought him back to his horrible childhood, the childhood where he was berated, where he was, honestly, she treated him terrible, locking him in a basement. And, you know, we talk about it like it's just like, okay, yeah, she locked him in a basement. But if you actually look at the reality of that and a person really living that way, a young kid living that way, that's horrible. Every time he talks about his mom, every conversation about her, he just constantly says how horrific and horrible the fights he had with her were. I mean, after the things that he has done to his victims, these poor women, he still calls the fights, verbal mainly fights with his mother, horrific. I mean, you can imagine the impact that those fights, the relationship with his mom had on him if he compared the two and he thought that the fights with his mom was worse than what he did to the victims. Now, his next victim, his final victim, the details of this crime, his final crime, is one of the worst I've ever heard. And it's bad. So I'm warning you now. So on 20th April 1973, his mom, Clarnell, she's now 52. She returns home from a party and they, are living together. So as she returns home from the party, she walks in and she looks through the doorway and she sees her son standing there. So she says to him, like she sighs and she's like, you're probably just going to want to sit up and talk all night. And Ed looks at her and he says very calmly, no, good night. So Clarnell then goes upstairs, goes to bed. And Ed waits for her to fall asleep before he enters her room and attacks her. Using a claw hammer, he bludgeoned his own mother to death. This next part, when I was researching this, I actually had to go and take a break because I almost threw up. I really did. So after he bludgeons her, he then slits her throat and then rips her head. And I don't know why, but when I was researching this, when I was just reading about it, I read, this part a lot. And this might sound really dumb, but when I read that he had assaulted her head, I thought he would be assaulting her. Oh my God, this sounds horrible, but hear me out. I thought he was going to be like, because if you cut the head here, I thought he was assaulting her like from here. And when I read that he was assaulting other victims, their decapitated heads, when I heard he was assaulting the decapitated heads, that's just what I assumed. I don't know what I was thinking. I was just thinking it's from the severed part. But no, he wasn't doing that. He was using his mother's mouth from the decapitated head to pleasure himself. Like, I don't know why that makes it so much worse, but it really does. And I don't know if my brain is just a little bit whack right now, but I was like, what? So disgusting. And then, as if that's not bad enough, he then takes his mother's head and he places it on the mantle and like puts it there so he can scream at it for an hour and then throw darts at it before he smashes it. The things that are what the heck are going on with people? So then, because he's not done, he's trying to dispose of her parts. He takes her tongue and her vocal cords and he puts it down what do you call the thing in America? We don't have it here. The waste disposal. And he turns it on and her body parts are in the grinder. But because obviously the waste disposal is not meant for that, it's like, I read that it was like too rubbery. And because of that, it like spits it back out into the sink. Like the scene that I'm picturing, this is so disgusting and twisted. And how does a human being even carry on? How does he not pass out from what he's doing? But he was angry. He really hated her. He made a statement saying that the act of putting her tongue and vocal cords in the waste disposal was very appropriate because of all the years that he used those parts of her tongue and her vocal cords to bitch and moan at him. That's anger. Then he's not done. He rips his mother's dead body and then he puts her in a cupboard and then he goes for a drink. Then he comes back home and he calls his mother's best friend, Sally Hallett, and she was 59 years old. And when he calls her, he invites her and he says, why don't you come over for a dinner and a movie? And she, unfortunately, accepted his invite. The reason why he was doing this was because he came up with this cover story to cover up the fact that his mom, was dead, by saying that, or if he was questioned, he was going to say that his mom and Sally went away on a vacation together. So when Sally arrived, Ed then strangled her, beheaded her, and then sat with her body all night before shoving it in a closet. The next morning, he decides to leave, but before that, he leaves a note saying, approximately 5:15 a.m. Saturday. No need for her to suffer any more at the hands of this horrible, murderous butcher. It was quick, asleep, the way I wanted it. Not sloppy and incomplete, gents. Just a lack of time. I got things to do, this guy. He then steals Sally's car, and he just drives and drives and drives, thinking that he's going to hear about these two murders on the news. Then he goes and he swaps Sally's car at a car rental place for a new car. And then again, he drives for ages without barely stopping. He only stops for gas and soda. And he's making his way to Colorado. And as he's driving, he's not hearing anything about his mother on the news. And now he's getting upset. He's like, why am I not hearing anything about this on the news? So as he's driving, he sees a phone booth. He pulls up and he enters the phone booth and he calls the cops and he confesses everything to the police. Now, remember, the police knew him. They knew him as Big Ed. And at first, they couldn't even believe that he could even be a killer. They didn't believe it. And the police had a name for him at the time, or who they thought was the killer, known as the co-ed killer. And soon after that, Ed started to describe things and, details that only the killer would know. And when he was questioned as to why he decided to stop killing and turned himself in, he made a statement saying, it wasn't serving any physical or real or emotional purpose. It was just a pure waste of time. Emotionally, I couldn't handle it much longer. Which is so interesting, because how often do you actually hear about killers stating that killing was taking a toll on them? I know it happens, but it's not really common. They don't want to get caught. I mean, he says that he was killing for no real purpose, but he obviously had a purpose. He had a way of doing things, a way he preferred to do things. He went on to say, toward the end there, I started to feel the folly of the whole damn thing and the point of near exhaustion, near collapse. I just said, to hell with it all, and I just called it off. When he turned himself in and when he was arrested, he was only 24 years old, and he went on to trial in October of 1973. And after 5.5 hours of deliberation by the jury, he was handed down 8 counts of murder and 8 life sentences. During this time, Ed attempted suicide twice, and he even asked the judge for the death penalty, but instead, he was given 7 concurrent life sentences. Ed was imprisoned at the California Medical Facility, and he was in there with Charles Manson. He is now in his 70s, and he was actually up for parole a few years ago, but that was denied. There are a lot of interviews with Ed because during his early years in prison, he agreed to do so many interviews. Soon, he was even meeting with the FBI to discuss why he had committed these horrible crimes. He speaks of them very objectively, and his interviews are crazy. I highly recommend you check them out, if not only just to see his size and how big he is, also the way he talks. It's just so creepy and chilling. I'm chilled. His case is also talked about on the Netflix show Mindhunters, and a lot of people actually tell me to watch that. I need to watch that. But his testimonies about his state of mind during the murders and stuff was integral in helping law enforcement understand serial killers. So while in prison, he's actually been a model prisoner, and his job is to schedule other inmates' appointments with psychiatrists and things like that. And he also narrates audiobooks. He's done over 5,000 hours of narrating. Ed's half-brother laughs at the fact that, he's a model prisoner, and people are like, oh, he's now, a good guy. But he's laughing at the fact, saying, no, he's not. He's a sociopath. He says that he could look you straight in the eye, telling you how sorry he was for everything he did, but at the same time, he's plotting how to kill you. So, serial killer, necrophiliac, genius. It's really clear that these people who have bad relationships with their mother, grandmother, auntie, any sort of women in their life, it's, these women who are supposed to love, nurture them, care for them, love them, when when these relationships are tainted, it really just doesn't end well a lot of the time. I mean, not everyone who has a bad relationship with the women in their life is going to end up a serial killer, but clearly there's some correlation. What goes wrong? I mean, Ed literally talks and talks and talks and talks about his mother and how she didn't need him and she didn't need his father and how she was, managing everything and controlling everything, how she would drive the men in her life away from her and how she believed that men were inferior. Like, obviously it was something, she had something going on too. And then what happened with his sisters? I mean, the whole time he was living with his mom, his sisters were there and maybe they were afraid of him, but what happened to them? Were they raised the same way as Ed, or did his mom give them special treatment, or didn't believe that they were bad because they were female? Or were they just smart enough to stay away from the both of them? Sometimes the hardest part about these cases is that I just end up having like way more questions than I do have answers. So let me know your thoughts down below, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's video and I will see you in the next one. Besitos. Bye.